In 37 years of law enforcement, I've investigated murders that would make your blood run cold. I've seen what humans are capable of when they abandon their humanity. But there's one case that still haunts my dreams, one investigation that I carried with me long after I hung up my badge. My name is Detective Frank Morrison, and I was the lead investigator when two innocent girls walked into the woods of Delphi, Indiana, and never walked out alive. February 13, 2017. Valentine's Day was just around the corner, and 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German were excited about their day off from school. These weren't troubled kids or runaways. They were honor students, beloved daughters, and best friends who shared everything. What they couldn't have known was that their decision to spend a beautiful afternoon hiking would thrust their small town into a nightmare that continues to this day. Here's what makes this case different from every other small-town murder I've worked. We have video. We have audio. We have the killer's voice telling these girls down the hill. We have more evidence than most solved cases ever produce. Yet for over 6 years, the monster who destroyed 2 families and shattered a community walked free among us. Until he didn't. The Monon High Bridge in Delphi, Indiana, stands 63 feet above Deer Creek, stretching 853 feet across the water below. Built in 1891, this abandoned railroad trestle became a popular hiking destination for locals and visitors alike. The bridge is narrow, with gaps between the railroad ties that offer glimpses of the creek far below. One wrong step, and you're falling through. It's not a place for the faint of heart, but for adventurous teenagers like Abby and Libby, it represented freedom and excitement. That Monday morning, Libby's older sister Kelsey dropped the girls off at the Delphi Historic Trails entrance around 1:30 p.m. The plan was simple: hike the trails, cross the famous High Bridge, take some pictures, and be ready for pickup by 3:30 p.m. Kelsey watched her little sister and best friend disappear into the woods, not knowing it would be the last time she'd see them alive. What happened next would become one of the most documented yet mysterious murders in American criminal history. Between 2:07 and 2:30 p.m., Liberty German used her iPhone to capture what investigators believe are the final moments of both girls' lives. The grainy video shows a man walking behind them on the Monon High Bridge. He's wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and what appears to be a newsboy cap. His hands are in his pockets, and he's walking with purpose toward the two girls. In my experience, predators don't usually allow themselves to be filmed. They're careful, calculating, paranoid about leaving evidence. But this killer either didn't see Libby recording, didn't care, or was so confident in his ability to control the situation that he pressed forward anyway. What Libby captured in those final moments would become the most crucial piece of evidence in a case that would baffle investigators for years. The audio is what still gives me chills. In a voice that's gravelly, authoritative, and absolutely terrifying, the man says, "Down the hill." 2 words. 15 letters. A command that would lead 2 innocent girls to their deaths and launch one of the most extensive investigations in Indiana's history. When 3:30 p.m. came and went without the girls appearing at the pickup location, concern quickly turned to panic. Kelsey called Libby's phone repeatedly. Family members began searching the trails. By evening, the Delphi Fire Department, Indiana State Police, and dozens of volunteers were combing every inch of the area around the High Bridge. As lead investigator, I arrived at the scene that night knowing we were dealing with something serious. 2 teenage girls don't just vanish into thin air, especially not in a town like Delphi. With a population of just under 3,000 people, this is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. People don't lock their doors. Children play outside until dark. The idea that something sinister could happen here seemed almost impossible. The search continued through the night and into the next morning. Volunteers organized into groups, covering every trail, every creek bed, every possible hiding spot. We used search dogs, helicopters, and every available resource. But it wasn't until around noon on February 14th, Valentine's Day, that volunteer searchers made the discovery that would change everything. Half a mile downstream from the High Bridge, on property belonging to Ron Logan, the bodies of Abigail Williams and Liberty German were found. They were located approximately 50 feet from Deer Creek, in a wooded area that would have been difficult to access and even more difficult to find without a systematic search. I won't go into graphic details out of respect for the families, but I will say this: the scene told a story of violence, control, and calculated evil. These girls had been murdered, and from the evidence we gathered, it was clear they had been killed shortly after the video was taken. The killer had forced them down the hill from the bridge, across the creek, and to the location where they died. What struck me immediately was the positioning of the bodies. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity gone wrong. Someone had taken time to arrange the scene. Someone had planned this. And someone had been confident enough to commit murder in broad daylight, less than a mile from a public trail system. The investigation that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in my career. Within days, the FBI had established a command center in Delphi. Agents from multiple states descended on our small town. The case attracted national media attention, with news trucks lining the streets and reporters conducting interviews on every corner. We released the video and audio almost immediately. The decision wasn't made lightly, but we knew that someone somewhere would recognize that voice, that walk, that man. The phrase "down the hill" became synonymous with the Delphi murders, played on news broadcasts across the country and analyzed by armchair detectives on social media platforms. The response was overwhelming. Tips poured in from across the nation. We investigated hundreds of leads, from local residents to transients passing through the area. Every registered sex offender in a 50-mile radius was questioned. We followed up on reports of suspicious vehicles, strange behavior, and anyone who might have been in the area that day. But here's what the public didn't know. We were dealing with a killer who was either incredibly lucky or incredibly careful. Despite having video and audio evidence, despite the massive investigation, despite thousands of tips and hundreds of interviews, we couldn't identify our suspect. One of the most frustrating aspects of the case was the quality of the evidence we had. The video, while groundbreaking for its very existence, was grainy and taken from a distance. Enhancing it only revealed so much. The audio was clear enough to know what was said, but voice recognition technology could only take us so far. We had puzzle pieces, but we couldn't see the complete picture. The composite sketches became a source of both hope and confusion. The first sketch, released in July 2017, showed a man with a mustache and goatee, appearing to be middle-aged. But in 2019, we released a second sketch showing a much younger-looking man, clean-shaven, with different facial features entirely. The change wasn't because we had new evidence about the killer's appearance, but because we had new insights into interpreting the evidence we already had. I want to pause here and address something that frustrated me throughout this investigation. The internet sleuths and true crime enthusiasts, while well-intentioned, often made our job more difficult. Social media platforms were flooded with theories, accusations, and supposed evidence that led to harassment of innocent people. I watched as local residents became suspects in the court of public opinion, their lives turned upside down by speculation and rumor. Let me be clear, investigating a case like this requires methodical, careful police work. Every lead must be verified. Every piece of evidence must be properly analyzed. Every interview must be conducted according to legal standards. The rush to solve the case, while understandable, can't compromise the integrity of the investigation. Ron Logan, the property owner where the bodies were found, became an early person of interest. His property was searched multiple times. He was interviewed extensively. His alibi was scrutinized down to the minute. The poor man endured years of suspicion and speculation, both from investigators and the public. He was never charged in connection with the murders and maintained his innocence until his death in 2022. This case taught me something important about modern investigations. Social media can be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, the ability to instantly share information with millions of people is unprecedented. The video and audio from Libby's phone reached more potential witnesses than we could have imagined 30 years ago. On the other hand, the instant analysis, speculation, and vigilante justice that followed created new challenges we'd never faced before. The years passed, and the case grew cold. Not cold in the traditional sense, we never stopped working it, but cold in the sense that new leads became scarce. The FBI maintained their command center in Delphi. The Indiana State Police continued their investigation. But with each passing year, the hope of resolution seemed to fade. The families of Abby and Libby never gave up. They organized search parties for other missing persons. They advocated for cold case investigations. They kept their daughters' memories alive while fighting for justice. The strength they showed during those dark years was remarkable, and it kept all of us motivated to never close the book on this case. Then came the press conference that changed everything. April 22, 2019. Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter stood before the media and made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the true crime community. "We have a witness. You made mistakes. We know that. You may be in this room." The implications were staggering. After more than 2 years of investigation, police were suggesting they had new information, a new witness, and possibly a new suspect. The second sketch was released, dramatically different from the first. The age estimate dropped from middle-aged to possibly as young as 18. The entire narrative of the case seemed to shift. But years passed again without an arrest. The investigation continued, but public interest began to wane. The case that had captivated the nation was becoming another unsolved mystery, another tragedy without resolution. I retired from the force in 2020, but I never stopped thinking about Abby and Libby. I kept in touch with the investigators still working the case. I followed every development, every press conference, every new piece of information that was released to the public. Then, on October 26, 2022, came the news that vindicated years of painstaking police work. Richard Allen had been arrested and charged with the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Richard Allen wasn't some mysterious drifter or obvious suspect who had evaded capture through cunning or luck. He was a local man, a CVS pharmacy technician who had lived in Delphi for years. He was married, employed, and by most accounts, unremarkable. He was the kind of person who blended into the background of small-town life, invisible in his ordinariness. This is what makes the resolution of this case both satisfying and deeply unsettling. The monster we had been hunting wasn't hiding in shadows or living on the margins of society. He was working at the local pharmacy, processing prescriptions for his neighbors, living among the very people who had been terrorized by his actions. The arrest came after investigators received a tip that led them to re-examine earlier evidence and interviews. Allen had actually been interviewed early in the investigation, in 2017, but somehow had been overlooked as the investigation progressed. It wasn't until 5 years later that his interview was properly followed up on, leading to his arrest. The details of the evidence against Allen have been largely sealed due to the ongoing legal proceedings, but court documents suggest that investigators have connected him to the scene through ballistic evidence. A cartridge found at the crime scene allegedly matches a gun owned by Allen, though he claims he never fired the weapon. What we know from court filings is that Allen admitted to being on the trails the day of the murders. He told investigators he was on the High Bridge around the same time as Abby and Libby. He described seeing other people on the trail system, including young girls matching the victims' descriptions. The investigation that led to Allen's arrest involved techniques that weren't available in 2017. Advances in DNA analysis, ballistic examination, and digital forensics allowed investigators to re-examine evidence with fresh eyes and new capabilities. It's a reminder that cold cases are never truly cold as long as there are investigators willing to keep working them. As I write this, Richard Allen has been charged but not convicted. He has entered a plea of not guilty, and he deserves the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. The families of Abby and Libby, after years of waiting, finally have someone to face in court, but they're still waiting for the justice they've sought for so long. The impact of this case on Delphi cannot be overstated. This small Indiana town became synonymous with unsolved murder, thrust into a spotlight no community wants. The residents lived for years, knowing that somewhere among them might be a killer. Parents became more protective. The innocent trust that characterizes small-town life was shattered. But Delphi also showed the world what a community looks like when it comes together in crisis. Volunteers searched for days. Local businesses provided food and supplies to investigators. The town rallied around the families of the victims and supported the ongoing investigation. The memorial that was erected near the High Bridge became a symbol not just of tragedy, but of love, memory, and hope. The case also highlighted the evolution of criminal investigation in the digital age. Liberty German's decision to record the man following them provided evidence that would have been impossible to gather just a generation ago. Her quick thinking in those final moments gave investigators tools that ultimately led to an arrest. She showed courage and presence of mind that saved the case from becoming another mystery without resolution. From an investigative standpoint, the Delphi Murders case represents both the possibilities and limitations of modern police work. We had more evidence than most solved cases ever produce, yet it took over 5 years to make an arrest. It shows that even with video, audio, DNA, and ballistic evidence, solving a murder requires methodical police work, scientific analysis, and sometimes, a bit of luck. The case also demonstrated the power and problems of public involvement in criminal investigations. Social media allowed for unprecedented sharing of information, but it also led to misinformation, harassment of innocent people, and conspiracy theories that complicated the investigation. It's a balance that law enforcement agencies are still learning to navigate. For the families of Abby and Libby, the arrest of Richard Allen represents progress, but not closure. They've spent years advocating for their daughters, while dealing with unimaginable grief. They've endured speculation about the case, criticism of the investigation, and the frustration of watching leads come and go without resolution. Their strength throughout this ordeal has been remarkable. The legal proceedings ahead will determine whether Richard Allen is guilty of these crimes. If convicted, he faces the possibility of life in prison without parole. But regardless of the outcome of his trial, the damage to Delphi, to the families, and to the community has already been done. 2 promising young lives were cut short, and nothing can bring them back. As investigators, we always hope for the best-case scenario: quick identification of the suspect, solid evidence, and a swift resolution that brings justice to the victims and peace to the families. The Delphi Murders case reminds us that real investigations don't always follow that script. Sometimes, justice takes years to achieve, and sometimes, the person responsible is hiding in plain sight. What I want people to remember about this case isn't just the tragedy or the mystery, but the lives of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Abby was an 8th grader who loved art and playing volleyball. She was known for her infectious laugh and her loyalty to her friends. Libby was a freshman who dreamed of working with children and was already showing leadership qualities that impressed adults around her. These weren't just victims of a senseless crime. They were daughters, sisters, friends, and students with bright futures ahead of them. They were part of a community that loved them and continues to honor their memory. The day they decided to go hiking should have been just another happy memory of their teenage years, not the last day of their lives. The Monon High Bridge still stands over Deer Creek, though it's now closed to the public due to safety concerns and its association with the murders. The Delphi historic trails continue to be used by hikers and nature enthusiasts, though many visitors now come because of the notoriety rather than the natural beauty of the area. A memorial near the High Bridge includes photos of Abby and Libby, flowers, and messages from visitors who have been touched by their story. It's become a place of pilgrimage for people interested in true crime, but more importantly, it's a place where the community can remember 2 young lives that were taken too soon. The case has inspired changes in how missing person investigations are conducted, particularly involving children and teenagers. The quick release of the video and audio evidence set a new standard for sharing information with the public. Law enforcement agencies across the country have studied the Delphi investigation to learn both what worked and what could be improved. Technology played a crucial role in both the crime and the investigation. Libby's smartphone preserved evidence that would have been impossible to gather otherwise. But it also took years of technological advancement to properly analyze that evidence and connect it to a suspect. It's a reminder that solving crimes often requires not just good detective work, but the right tools and techniques. The investigation consumed thousands of hours of police work, hundreds of thousands of dollars in resources, and involved agencies from local to federal levels. It generated over 70,000 tips from the public and resulted in interviews with hundreds of potential suspects. It represents one of the most extensive investigations in Indiana's history, and it may not be over yet. As we move forward with the legal proceedings against Richard Allen, there are still questions that may never be answered. Why did he target Abby and Libby? Was this a crime of opportunity or something planned? Were there warning signs that were missed? How did he evade detection for so long while living and working in the same community where he allegedly committed murder? Some of these questions may be answered during the trial. Others may remain mysteries forever. But what we do know is that 2 young girls showed remarkable courage in their final moments, that a community came together in crisis, and that dedicated investigators never gave up on finding justice. The Delphi Murders case serves as a reminder that evil can exist anywhere, even in the smallest and seemingly safest communities. But it also shows that good people will fight against that evil, that families will never stop seeking justice for their loved ones, and that investigators will pursue the truth no matter how long it takes. For me, this case represents both the frustration and the satisfaction of police work. The frustration of having evidence but struggling to solve the puzzle. The satisfaction of finally seeing an arrest after years of work. The reminder that every case involves real people with real families who deserve answers and justice. As I reflect on my career and this case that has haunted me for so long, I'm reminded of why I became a police officer in the first place. It wasn't for the excitement or the authority, but for the opportunity to stand between good and evil, to speak for victims who can no longer speak for themselves, and to bring some measure of justice to a world that often seems unfair. Abigail Williams and Liberty German will never get to grow up, graduate from high school, go to college, or pursue their dreams. But their story has touched millions of people around the world. Their courage in those final moments provided the evidence that may finally bring their killer to justice. Their families have shown strength that has inspired others facing similar tragedies. The Delphi Murders case isn't over yet. The legal proceedings will continue, and there may be more revelations to come. But regardless of what happens next, the investigation represents years of dedicated work by hundreds of people who refused to give up on two young girls who deserved better than the fate that befell them on that February afternoon in 2017. In my 37 years of law enforcement, I learned that some cases stay with you forever. The Delphi Murders is one of those cases. It's a reminder of the evil that exists in the world, but also of the good people who fight against it. It's a story of tragedy and loss, but also of community and perseverance. Most importantly, it's a story about two young girls whose lives mattered, whose deaths won't be forgotten, and whose killer may finally face justice. The bridge where Abby and Libby walked their final steps still crosses Deer Creek. The woods where they died still stand. But their memory lives on in the hearts of everyone who knew them and everyone who has been touched by their story. Justice may have been delayed, but if Richard Allen is indeed guilty of these crimes, justice will not be denied. And that's what Abigail Williams and Liberty German deserved from the very beginning.